Welcome to PausePoint, the podcast, your ultimate destination for reclaiming your time, revitalizing your spirit, and saying no to burnout. I'm Felicia Wiley, CEO and founder of PausePoint, and I'm here to ignite your journey towards a more balanced and mindful life. Join us each week as we delve into practical tips, inspiring stories, and expert advice designed to integrate mindfulness into your daily life. We'll explore mental health tips, discover ways to strengthen work-life balance, and find methods to reduce your stress. Whether you're new to mindfulness or seeking to deepen your practice, we're here to spark action. It's time to reclaim our time, take more breaks, and infuse our lives with moments of peace and rejuvenation. Join us starting July 15th for our debut season, where we'll share practical tips, inspiring stories, and expert advice to help you thrive in today's fast-paced world. Let's create a mindful world, one pause at a time. Welcome to this week's episode of PausePoint, the podcast. Today, we're excited to welcome Tony Ware, a fellow Muhlenberg College alumnus with a background in psychology. Tony's career path has taken him from special education to diverse HR roles across private, nonprofit, and public sectors. In our conversation, we'll explore how Tony's psychology background has shaped his approach to HR, mindfulness, and personal growth. We'll delve into the importance of emotional wellness, self-understanding, and the importance of consistent routines, and even chat about maintaining a holistic approach to health and wellness. Tony, as a fellow Muhlenberg grad, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Can you give us some information about your background and who you are?
My background includes being a Muhlenberg alumni, and I went to school with you, and so it was cool to just see you post about your new business, PausePoint, or rather the podcast. I was a psych major at Muhlenberg. A lot of that kind of surrounded my own journey of mindfulness, but also like emotional wellness. And I had two paths that I got onto. And the first one was actually a special education teacher. I did that for a whopping 3 months. And then I moved to HR, where I realized a lot of psych majors did use their psychology background degree in the corporate world, and how that helps them navigate the thing that I think we think most of when we think of human resources, which is potentially employee relations, right? So knowing oneself, but also knowing what someone else might be bringing to the table. Having a psych background is very helpful in navigating that. I started my career in the private sector at a PR firm. Was there for about a year, quickly realized I wanted to be a part of organizations, and found myself in the nonprofit world for the next 3 years. And now I reside in the public sector, where I've enjoyed a good mixture of a mission that resonates with me while also having funding that nonprofits don't always have.
So I want to quickly jump back to the special education, because you said you only lasted 3 months. What happened with that?
Less of a misalignment. Some of it was just logistical. The school was in Baltimore. I lived in Bowie. It's about an hour and a half drive. Special education wasn't exactly the route that I expected to go into, but what I loved was the individual impact I could see. However, what I realized on the grander scales, especially if you know that world, like the IEPs, it felt like we weren't actually there we weren't going to see certain results. And I really am potentially a little bit more results oriented. And so I just felt we weren't serving as much as we could, because the expectation was, hey, there's only so far they're going to go. So I'll keep it as PC as possible. But like that, for me, that didn't align with what I wanted to do there.
Okay, and it sounds like, at least with HR, you are able to see the results.
See the results, be a part of the conversations, accountability of police for both the individual and business side, right? So I'm sure we'll get into it at some point in this conversation, but I think a lot of people, HR is there to just protect the business. And while that may be true, how do we protect the business? It's by protecting the largest asset of the business, and the wellness of the employees, them feeling like they're able to develop and be a part of a place where they can thrive and do good work, is me also doing my job. So,
what does mindfulness mean to you?
I like that. So yeah, hopefully we can have a working definition today. But mindfulness for me is being present. So knowing how I myself am feeling internally, and then potentially that next layer to it is, how am I also being perceived?
I completely agree. Mindfulness, it's being present. It's having a moment-by-moment awareness of our thoughts, our feelings, the external environment.
Yeah. Okay. So I think overall, my personal journey with mindfulness again started with my time at Muhlenberg. My first year, I was a bio major, thought I was going to be a veterinarian. Gen Chem 2 taught me very quickly that I was not going to be one. And I felt a little bit lost at certain moments, especially also going into college as a wrestler and having a nose break that kind of ended my wrestling career and switched to track. I just went through a lot of these changes and having to really take a moment to learn about myself again or acknowledge the narratives that I have been telling myself. And so, yeah, it brought me to psychology and to just understand myself more. I'd say the mindfulness journey started first with the acknowledgement of my emotional state and also why some of those behaviors might be coming into play based on my own background or just other psych. And then from there, I think it moved further into realizing mindfulness connected with the physical space. It connected with my spiritual self. And so I think the more you get emotionally sound, at least for me, that journey has led me closer to spirituality, how those all connect again to my physical well-being and all facets of self, include mindfulness. So hopefully that answers it.
No, you did. And what I like is that when you say holistic, you really mean like holistic because it is all interrelated. You can't not take care of your physical body and then also not take care of your emotional and mental and spiritual self. If you take care of one, you have to take care of the other. It's
Right.
like any sort of fitness routine. Like you have to go through the motions, hit all the different parts. You just need to do all of it, or else
Yeah.
you're not just going to be the best version of yourself. So you said you started. It
If I
started
may
off.
comment on
Yeah.
one layer there, right? So there's this thing for mindfulness. Anytime I'm feeling a little bit off, I have this acronym that my mentor told me about, which is HALT. Hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Tired, hungry are two things that are in the physical realm. They easily can affect our emotional state. So sometimes when we joke about it, the Snickers commercial has it, maybe it's right, but that's real, right? And am I reacting a certain way simply because I need a snack, right? Am I needing to be extra careful in my reaction to things because I got a bad night's sleep last night, right? And that might be communicating to someone, hey, look, I'm a little bit off and changing your schedule, or that might be an internal check of being like, hey, that person cutting me off is having a larger effect because I'm already sleeping. So that's a part of mindfulness and like those other areas where again the physical might then connect to your emotional state.
And to recap, so we have HALT. It's hungry, angry, lonely, and tired.
Yeah.
And
And so like lonely might be on that emotional side,
yeah,
but that is also a part of your holistic health, right? Are you building or do you have relationships in your life that fill your cup? Or do you have relationships in your life that don't actually give that full fulfillment, which is keeping you from developing the relationships that do fill that cup a little bit more? What are those high return on investment things for you? And I think we all have individually those things or areas that have the highest positive impact on us.
how do you integrate this holistic wellness journey of yours into your role as an HR professional?
Yeah, so I think I'll give a little context to where I realized my personal journey could connect into the workplace. And like many young millennial professionals, COVID was the catalyst, right? And I think we will get a little bit more into this portion of it. But during COVID, I had this moment about 2 years into my career where I switched roles for my second job as an HR professional. So I was at a nonprofit, and that nonprofit originally was in person. And then we went remote. I realized at this point that I wanted to add another layer to my HR career, which was the finance side. So I would not have probably done this before, but moved to a fully remote role because again, we were at home at this point. And I moved to that fully remote role so that I could again add that finance portion to my HR role. And I think what I learned the most in that moment was I started experiencing something called imposter syndrome, right? And I was called upon to be the main HR. I am the main. I was the only HR professional on the team for the United States across 5 cities. And I was one of 5 HR professionals across 5 other countries. And so I felt like I was being called on to have the right quote unquote answer. And again, this is some internal pressure from my own self. And I just felt like really out of whack at times. And I felt high levels of anxiety to make the right decisions. Am I the right person, etc. And I think at that point, one of the things that really helped me is to acknowledge, like, why am I feeling imposter syndrome? I think one layer of mindfulness is a true objective assessment of oneself, emotionally and holistically in general, right? And so some of that was like, hey, look, I have not experienced some of these things as an HR professional, and I need to surround myself with those who have. That gave me a moment where I went and relied on or found a group of HR professionals who were all actually higher up. So like they were HR directors and they were all employers in DC. And so we had a commonality, which is we were all in DC, we're all HR professionals, we're all navigating this world that no HR professional has before, which is the pandemic. And in learning and sitting in those groups, one, I, of course, again, found community, so that helped. But then also, you know what I found out? Everybody's figuring it out as we go.
Exactly.
And how freeing that was for me to realize, truth be told, yes, I may make mistakes, but at the same time, if I'm doing my best and I'm trying to make this, and I'm basing these decisions off of something that's rooted in going and talking to others, best practices, etc. Like I made the best judgment, and that's okay. And also I realized in that time, very few things are irreversible, and to not take myself so seriously in moments, but also gain the knowledge that helps me do the job the best way as possible. So again, I think just to recap that answer, because I rambled a little bit, but it's like mindfulness there for me was the acknowledgement of why do I feel the way I feel, with an attempt to then actually work on the things that are having me feel that way. So if I feel like I don't have enough knowledge in the area, am I seeking that knowledge? If I feel like I'm super anxious about my decisions, then am I taking a pause? Am I finding the right necessary tools and emotional states to be able to help myself do better in those moments? So hopefully that answered the question. Happy to more.
And I want to jump back because you sought out a community of people and then you realize that, hey, no one actually really knows what they're doing. They just do it and they do it with an open mind and they're giving themselves the grace to make mistakes.
Yeah.
And I think that is a very valuable thing to realize, to acknowledge. It's relaxing knowing that I make it up as I go, but I also make it up with the intent of I will figure it out. And if I don't know it, someone else will know it.
Yeah. There's a quote by Maya Angelou, and she says, do the best you can until you know better. And when you know better, do better.
I like that.
And that was in my signature for like all of the pandemic, right? Which was to acknowledge I am doing my best and I still may make mistakes. And I'll learn from those mistakes and I'll do better next time.
Yeah. It's a beautiful thing not to be so hard on yourself and to really give yourself like that grace. But you also talked about navigating this experience like through COVID, which was incredibly stressful for so many people. No one knew what they were doing. The world was scrambling. What signs of like stress and burnout during COVID did you recognize within yourself? I know that you mentioned that you did like an assessment, but before you even do an assessment, like what happened internally for you to realize that I need to do an assessment?
So you ask a little bit like, why did I get into human resources as well? And I think a lot of it, you ever heard like in sports, I wanted the coach that I didn't have?
Yeah.
I had good coaches though, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Shout out to those coaches. But human resources, right? I hope to have a moment of transparency for myself. And if this helps another young man, then sure. But I wasn't as in touch, even as a psych major, with my own feelings and what I was feeling. And so I was drowning it out in different ways, whether it be just ignoring it and just take a moment as a young man and just acknowledge, hey, I do feel scared, right? Oh, I am feeling anxious. And that is affecting my sleep. That's keeping me from, or I was feeling frozen in terms of not being able to go and work out. So these routines that I used to do, I was not doing. How do I recognize burnout in myself? Is for me, it could be feelings of excessive worry, even when in that moment, like I'm okay. So if I'm sitting in my living room right now, nothing's going on, but I'm ruminating about the next day, oh, that's a sign that my sleep schedule is off. If I am having trouble eating potentially. It's my sleep, it's my eating patterns, and it's the thinking about things even when in that moment I don't necessarily need to be thinking about it. Those are things that contribute to me feeling burnt out.
And then that's when you're like, okay, I'm recognizing these, you acknowledge them, first step, then you assess and you dive into, okay, why am I feeling a certain way?
Yeah. Now what that process looks like is meditation and prayer. So this is that spirituality portion. I think the first step was to realize, hey, I start to feel really burned out when I don't stick with some of the routines that make me feel good. And so I think this is where mindfulness meets wellness. I like to think of my mindfulness practice of the ability to be able to call out in what areas of my wellness am I either doing really well in or could I do better in. And so if I sit down in the morning and I meditate, but I'm really struggling to focus, why is that? Do I have too much on my plate? Am I struggling to even meditate? Am I sleeping well enough? That assessment now again is to first pause every single morning, meditate, pray on what am I going to be doing today and how do I step into being the best version of myself, whatever that is for that day. What is your intention for the day? And then I also reflect on the end of every single day through an inventory process of what went well and what are some things that I could have done better and why. And then the next layer of that, and this is like sticking with the community piece, is I share that with two other men in my circle who I'm connected with, and they share theirs with me.
Quick recap. If you are excessive worrying, you're going to take note of that. If your sleep schedule is off, you're going to highlight that. If you have trouble issue, you're going to start now questioning why. And that falls under the assessment portion, where you are trying to figure out, like, where do you need to do better in your life? Where are you excelling? Where are you not? And then it sounds like you also have some really amazing routines. You wake up, you meditate, you have some of your affirmations, and at the end of the day, you set your intention for the day.
When I say I set my intention for the day, again, this is the spiritual realm, right? Help me to really focus on being my best self, but also what is that best self, right? So I want to be a worker amongst workers. I want to be a friend amongst friends, and I want to be a man of integrity. And so that is every day. That's what I will hope to step out into the day with. And so that's what I mean by my intentions for the day. And I call on something outside of myself to help me in the moments that I am human.
I love that.
Yeah.
Could you do a weekly recap and then a monthly?
So I think I would call it probably like annual goal setting.
Okay.
But that's outside of the inventory.
Different process.
That's like in the result space. I think when I think of doing a recap of the day, that's in the process space. If I have a good process, the results in my eyes are inevitable. But I have to focus on the day-to-day self that allows me to get to that ultimate end goal, which might be your quarterly, annual, whatever goal setting that you do. What on a daily basis gets you there?
I know that you said that you have your annual, and those are the end results that you want at the end of every single year. Do you mind sharing your 24-year goals and like where you think you're in line with them?
Yeah, because I think it does go into mindfulness and specifically wellness for me. Because all of my goals, I have professional goals, I have physical goals, I have personal goals, I have financial goals, I have educational goals, I have spiritual goals, right? And so, for example, a fitness goal, to hit the gym at least 3 to 4 times a week. Again, all of my goals are not focused on a result though. It's if my goal is to be physically fit, I want my like holistic, like overall goal is to that. Then what are the behaviors that allow me to get that? So I focus on that's like my goals. So consistency, 3 to 4 times a week, hitting the gym. Financial goal might just be consistency. Hey, I want to track my expenses, and also I want to make sure that I am investing at XYZ percentage for the year. So for me, again, that's like consistency portion. And yeah, I guess that's that one. Personal side, I have not been traveling as much. And so I put in a travel goal. So one of it was to get my passport updated. Thanks to my girlfriend. I have that appointment on Tuesday. But to travel at least once a quarter and to go and see at least one of my friends who is not in the state or one of those trips. And then a professional goal or educational one was to look into an MBA program just to add to my business knowledge. I had some extra letters behind my name. And so, yeah,
Can't hurt, honestly.
It was there to look into different programs, talk to people who have that degree, the MBA, and look into different programs.
And I want to dive more into that. When you are setting these goals, what is going through your mind? Do you have a 2-hour period where you're like, I'm going to sit down with myself, have some conversations, and figure out where I want to be? Like, do you like set up like a vision statement, and then from that vision statement set up your goal? What's that process like?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of it comes from reading. So there's a good book called Surrounded by Setback. And also, of course, it's very similar to Atomic Habits, if you've read that one. Surrounded by Setbacks has this idea of breaking up pieces of your life that you want to do better in or who you want to be and making it a part of your identity as opposed to just focusing on what does a successful person look like. Because that's what you want. You want your new identity to be like, what is, and by the way, that should be individual to you, right? So success for me might look different than success for you, hopefully. I focus on what does the best version of Tony in 2024 look like. And I base that also a little bit out of what are some areas in 2023 that I was like, I could have done better. And so I'm going to circle it all back to that mindfulness. And so that's being present. Hey, where in my life am I out of alignment with who I hope to be based on who I quote unquote say or think I am? Am I actually living into that? If I think or say that I'm a person that cares about holistic health, my fitness is off. Am I? Right? And it's like taking an objective look at that. How's my financial life looking? Mm-hmm. And by the way, that is not necessarily just mean wealth. But am I spending my money on the things that actually are in alignment with what I want to spend on? Or am I following the Joneses, so to speak, right? So if I say I care about travel, but all my money is going to restaurants and I didn't travel, then do I care about travel? Or am I not being intentional about? And so I think, again, it's just, what does your best self look like? And my goal setting is based off of that.
And it looks like you value, from what I've heard, alignment, authenticity, and consistency.
Yeah, I like that.
You mentioned the word a couple of times. I'm like, okay. What was your process in figuring out your values, your core values?
That's good. So what helped me determine my values? I think for me, some of my values, especially recently, were developed in a space of unpacking. Like, I think all of us walk around with some type of narrative that we tell ourselves. And for me, going to this mindfulness idea, it was like I had to really unpack through inventory, through thinking and reflecting on my life, and really actually like just unpacking certain pieces of it. How close to your external or internal narrative are you really? And if there's areas that you are, perfect. Is that also who you want to be? And if not, then how do you change? If you're not, which I found in some areas, like I was not, I was like, oh, wow, okay. I need to go back to the drawing board, so to speak. And so again, being like mindful is being where your feet are. So instead of being like, hey, how do I see Tony? It's like, who is Tony? I think that was really the moment for me where I was then able to start to determine some of my values by saying, here's the narrative of me that I had, and how did those not actually match up? And then it really was able to solidify some of those true values that I have for myself. And that's where spiritual life really came into play, where I was like, wow, what does it look like to live under more spiritual principles? And so one spiritual principle that I really believe in is like service. I think that can be brought into the professional space. So like you've heard of servant leaders, right? I think switching to that mindset was a big shift for me, even just professionally, but very much so in my personal life.
How do you serve as an HR professional?
So for example, to go back to the imposter syndrome, right? To me, I can't really have imposter syndrome if I'm approaching something from a service mindset, right? Because I care about what you think about me potentially. I care about getting the kudos or applause for you think it's, as opposed to being like, hey, was everyone taken care of? The more that I approach it from a standpoint of I want to approach my work from a place of integrity. I want to approach my work from a place of competence. As long as I'm doing those things, then what is there to feel an imposter about, right? Because I'm being authentic in my approach.
Yes.
And then that also does mean, hey, look, like if the conversation, so one thing that scared me a ton was the COVID policies. no one had approached that, right? Like, when is it too soon to potentially bring in the vaccine? How do you have conversations with staff who are worried about the vaccine, right? And so to get into the service portion is, hey, what was our need as an organization to have our staff vaccinated? Do we have a legitimate reason? Okay, cool. If the conversation and we've had these things like realizations that based under XYZ, we do need to have it, then okay, then I'm approaching my job and the policy creation from a place of integrity and need. Mm-hmm. So I'm doing a service for the organization, but also I'm helping protect. So we work with kids. So the bigger purpose there was we knew a lot of our kids lived in multi-generational households. And so if our staff is potentially exposing them to a virus that harms their grandmother, then we've not done our job. So I can approach even the hard conversation with a staff member who might be worried, but like, how do we have an open, honest conversation? And how do we have those true conversations, see someone fully, and still get what we need? And that might be like, hey, then maybe you do mask, maybe you do get tested instead, right? So that's the full portion of bringing, I guess for me, the values and mindfulness in, is to know oneself, to then also be able to, I don't think I can see anyone else if I can't see myself.
That's amazing. It sounds like you truly set out with intention.
Hope so. Yeah. That's why I don't know how to respond to that moment, but yes, I'd like to think so.
Well, intention, integrity, and it's just like being authentic, true to yourself, and at the end of the day, making sure that you represent yourself and you become that version that you want to be.
Yeah.
So that's what I meant by setting up.
No, for sure. Well, because even to bring it to that example, I had to acknowledge for myself that there were some fears that I even had about the vaccine at that time, right? And so can I understand if someone was fearful about it? So what's the human portion of that in the conversation in the workplace?
In the interview packet that I sent you earlier, you talked about addressing specific needs of staff across generational, gender, and racial lines. I feel like this also relates to how you approach those conversations and how you are so thoughtful in your approach to potential policies that get initiated.
Yeah.
You're in those rooms, like having these conversations with decision makers. How do you put your foot down or make your voice heard and make the conversation take a more thoughtful approach to those of different generational, gender, and races?
No, that's a good point, right? And I think I'll go back a little bit to knowing what lens you come to the table with, right? But who is Tony? I'm a millennial African-American male from the Northeast in DC, right? Who leans a little bit more to the crippling inclusive side. That's the lens I'm walking to the table with in more spaces than not. If I know that, can I also, through rapport, through conversations, through just getting to know people, they're gonna, let's be real, we know the lens that a lot of people are coming to the table with, right? And if you have a little bit communication rapport with somebody, how they might be approaching a certain situation or thinking about it, it's posing questions. It is bringing up different viewpoints to help them see from another perspective, because you also understand from your own lens what are some of your own blind spots. And therefore, it's, hey, how do you help them see some of their blind spots as well? Because you said put your foot down, but in a respectful way. And so we have those diversity, equity, inclusion conversations. From my perspective, with my identifiers that I told you, it's like a no-brainer that we're having some of these conversations. But also, can I understand potentially someone who is not growing up in that environment, is coming to the table with different lenses, how they could feel like, oh, am I being attacked? Hey, can we hold space? That might be how they're feeling. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the more we approach their lens with some compassion, I really do believe it's human nature to want to see one another, right? But I think not everyone has the mindfulness practice to be able to say, like, how am I really feeling right now? So if I can turn the corner first and acknowledge how you might be feeling, because I'm okay with understanding how I'm feeling, then I invite you to do the same for me.
Obviously, the perspective that you and I both hold to this, because I'm in complete agreement, others may not necessarily be as agreeable or understanding, or maybe a little bit more stubborn. When dealing with those more stubborn people, how do you try to work with them or get them to understand your perspective?
I think that's allyship moment. And so as maybe less so in the, actually, I think this falls into HR, right? And anything I do, whether it's a performance management process, whether it is when we talk about compensation, it's like having those champions. And so, what are champions? Champions are people across the organization who have influence. And that does not necessarily always just come from a title. And so, sometimes it is the realization of knowing, hey, the message, am I the right messenger for that person? And if not, and if I've built rapport with someone else who is an influencer in that space, how can we have conversations with that person to help them influence the person who we're already having trouble with? Because they, for whatever their reasons, who do they digest the information best from? And how do I then arm that person with the information necessary to have the conversation that needs to be had? I think that's how I've navigated a lot of those moments. It's my job as an HR professional to arm leadership with the information necessary to make the best decision. However, I am an advisor. They don't have to do it. We can be honest about that, right? Not, hey, I could tell you we shouldn't do X, Y, Z because of whatever the case may be, but if they ultimately say, no, we're not going to do that. Depending on what it is, and that's like your own zone as a professional, and why I have walked away from certain organizations. We're not who I thought we were. And as a professional, I can vote with my feet and go elsewhere.
Based off of your experiences, what are the future trends in HR management, especially in terms of wellness and diversity?
I am going to key in on somebody who I thought was pretty helpful early in this transition, especially during the pandemic. I think this probably connects more with mindfulness. We all know Simon Sinek, right? And he just talks about this authentic individual in the workplace, right? And so he keyed in on this one moment he had where he was in a meeting with various different levels within his organization. And he commented after working with a client in the meeting how difficult and terrible it is to work with that client. Oh man, yeah, he like apparently went off. And one of his junior professionals was like, wow, he was apologetic to that professional after. He was like, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, you shouldn't have seen me act that way. And she said, hey, actually, it was really beneficial to see that you also struggled with that client because everyone was acting like that person wasn't difficult to work with. And it made me feel like it was me that was having the trouble with that person. And so, what do I mean by all that? Mindfulness is, again, to have more times where there's more people in the workplace who are willing to acknowledge their full scope of self. Hey, if you had a terrible night's sleep, it doesn't mean you don't go and do your job. But do you normalize saying, hey, I'm going to take a sick day because I didn't sleep that well that night? Is it a leader who's, hey, saying out loud, I reacted poorly in that meeting. And I want to acknowledge that too. I think the pandemic gave us a moment of empathy and compassion because we saw each other in the workspace in a way we had not seen before. And I believe that overall, long term, I think we're going to go more towards that, which is authenticity in the workplace where I struggle with this buzzword of we bring our full selves. But yeah, like where we bring more of our full self to the workplace in ways that are still appropriate.
Of course. I think there's also a fine line. That is the trend in which we are heading, where people are a little bit more compassionate and understanding regarding illness. Mental health is becoming more known, but there's also a level of appropriateness. I'm not going to have a terrible night, go to work and be like, I don't want to be here because I didn't really sleep well and now I'm grumpy. Leave me alone. So I'm still going to go and I'm still going to try to put my best foot forward. Will I try to potentially, I would reduce, if there was people that I did not necessarily work well with, on days where I'm not feeling my best, I may try to avoid them a little bit more.
Right? Hey, I'm not having that meeting.
I may cancel more meetings and I may also maybe go for a walk. Like midway through the day when I know I'm just like, this is not working. There are things
I
you
go
can
for
do.
a walk every day. Yeah. That's a part of my work schedule.
There's so much that you can do to mitigate how you're feeling, not let it impact your work, and just know like how much you can bring to the table. Because we all have a cup. And mine is always overflowing. It needs to stop. I'm tired of it. But I'm getting better at maintaining its capacity and then taking a step back when I'm like, I literally cannot do anymore.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. I know I'm the interview, but let's have a HR conversation.
Okay, let's hear it. Let's do that.
You come to me and you express jokingly, my cup's always overflowing. Mm-hmm. What would help you in the workplace from a manager, HR professional, colleague at your level, whoever this is coming from, that would help bring you into mindfulness or feel seen to be able to do what you need to get back on track and feeling full?
Honestly, I will just need to not be given any more work for the time being until I'm able to deliver on the promises. And my biggest issue in the workplace is that, okay, so I am a data engineer in a male-dominated field. In a past company that I worked for, I was also like the team secretary, and I was put in some female-oriented roles.
Yeah.
And it was just obviously like my manager would have never asked a male employee to do half the stuff that I was being asked to. But because I do have a lot to prove, we always have a lot that we have to prove. I'm an overachiever. That means I will also say yes. And anything that I give, it's going to be top tier. But that also puts undue pressure on me to perform. And I can do it because, once again, I am an overachiever and I have done it before and I will continue doing it. But there are some times where I just have too many projects and I cannot say yes anymore. Let's take a step back, let her deliver, and then she'll come back and let you know when she's ready.
Yeah, no, I like that. And I think that goes into certain conversations I've had with supervisors. Our struggle, right? We want everything fast. But we're also willing to work for it. I do think so. As a generation, I think we're willing to work for it. And I want to see that you see it. I think there's one way to help some managers, and it's, hey, have you checked in and asked them how's their bandwidth? Like, you can start that conversation with that person. Or if I'm a colleague and I see, hey man, you're doing a lot. Like, how's your capacity right now? And like you being able to be open and honest and say, man, I'm at my limit. What would the workplace be if there was more moments of that? So as much as we hope that people bring some mindfulness, I think again that's that moment of everyone's working on their mindfulness and they can put themselves and say, hey, I'm stressed out right now. And because I see I'm stressed out, I'm more readily able to see that you.
Yeah. Before, when I was in the office, it's really easy to see what everyone's doing. You and I, now that we're remote,
I'm hybrid.
You're hybrid. I don't actually see you working. I just see you in the team meetings. I don't know what projects you are on. And for those who are remote, not hybrid, what would you recommend some managers and supervisors do to help improve transparency between?
Yeah, man. And so I joke with you, right? Because even in hybrid, we see this. But when we were fully remote, I think depends on your team size, right? So this we did as an all staff. However, I think this can be done on the team level. And it's not to put anyone on the spot, but it's to give a moment of, hey, we're going to go around and everyone check in. What are some of the things you're working on today? What are some challenges you're having in that work? And can we all be thought partners to you right now in this moment as you have us all, right? Like, and so you might bring up, right? And this is that building rapport. I think you have to be very intentional about building team camaraderie in a remote space. Like, I won't sit here and be that person and say like culture is impossible to establish remotely, but I do think it requires a much more intentional perspective. And yeah, so that was one of the ways we did was like, especially with our operations team, it's like, hey, what are the tasks you're working on? And even though it might not be my space in marketing and communications, I can hear what you're going through. Yeah, you're at your limit, and you can say right there in that meeting, I actually need to finish X, Y, and Z, and then I can get you on that. Or it could be like, hey, it was really good to have another person's perspective or something, especially if you all on the same team. Have you tried this? Does that automatically alleviate them having to go through 2 extra hours of thinking through something, right? Just because you have a fresh pair of eyes on it. I don't know if that answered the question. That would be how I would help teams or suggesting what has worked in the past for me.
And I like that you definitely point out that it is possible to have culture in a remote or hybrid workplace. You just have to be intentional about it and you have to work on it.
It is hard though. I think some of it is what are the values you have as an organization, because I think that's where you're going to see it most in terms of culture in a remote setting is and being okay with that.
And that's also why leadership is very important, to help lead those teams and to help trickle down the org values into the team as well.
What are the core ones you want to keep and what are pertinent to our team though?
What are 2 things that you want listeners to get from this conversation?
I think the first one is to know thyself, be true to thyself, whatever that is. And so challenge yourself to dig a little bit deeper and have a relationship with yourself and be honest with yourself where you're at. The next portion of be true to yourself is then put into place the things that allow you to be that best version of you. And I think mindfulness and wellness is a big way that you can achieve that. And the more we know ourselves, the better we show up in work, but just in life in general. So that'd be number one. And then two, find that consistency in your life that allows you to do that. So what helps you operate in an optimal state? I need to go to bed at 9:30. I'm a morning bird. I need to work out consistently. And whatever those things are that allow you to operate your optimal self, find and do those things and see where the world takes you and how you show up so much better. So yeah, hopefully that's helpful. But those would be my two.
It's all interrelated. At the end of the day, it's all us trying to be the best version of ourselves, us trying to figure out how to do that. That self-realization, that's just the starting point. It's the beginning to me.
Yeah. So then what are your two nuggets that have helped you in this space, whether it be professionally or just personally, be the best version of yourself?
I think you mentioned this during our conversation, self-reflection, and then also questioning whether or not this is the kind of person I want to be and who is the person I want to be and then how do I get there? Because I also do some very similar goal setting. And I also break it up into monthly and then I do it like weekly. So I go quarterly and I just keep breaking it down, but they're all in alignment with my vision statements. And you have like your travel, you have your financial, you have your fitness. I also have my professional, my personal, my friendship, spiritual.
Do you know Remy Sadie?
No, who's that?
He has this Netflix show, one that I'll Teach You to Be Rich. And then he has a podcast, I'll Teach You to Be Rich, and a book that's all under the same name. And again, it sounds crazy. You're like, what is like the rich thing? But he really talks about this idea of a rich life. And it's, yes, there's monetary portions to it, of course. And he is a financial guy, but it's so much more than that. It's, hey, if shopping is a big part of your life, how do you do that unapologetic? And live your best life.
We try. It's hard though. No, my shopping vision statement is for me to, I can actually go into it. It's basically saying I like quality, but I also can't have quality all the time. So I've learned, I do this practice now where if I see an item, I try to think about how often I'm actually going to use it. And then I take the full retail price and I divide it by that amount of time in days. And I'm like, okay, am I willing to spend? That's central cost. Yeah. And I'm like, am I willing to spend this when I can also take this money and put it towards another thing? And if I think the amount is like less than $10 because I'm going to be using it more frequently, I'm like, oh, that is
no-brainer.
Yeah, it's a no-brainer. If it's less than that, I'm like, maybe not.
I like that. Yeah. Okay, yeah.
It works. All right. We are going to end the interview for now. Tony, thank you so much for your time today. It was great talking with you and catching up. Honestly, go Mules!
We fly together. Yeah. No, I appreciate it. Again, it's so cool seeing you do and go out and do the PausePoint, and thank you for having me on.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of PausePoint, the podcast. Our debut season is packed with enlightening conversations featuring thought leaders, burnout prevention specialists, authors, and mindfulness coaches. Together, we delve into topics like effective stress management, burnout, goal setting, and transformative mindfulness techniques. PausePoint is dedicated to enhancing well-being by seamlessly integrating mindfulness into your daily routine. Our innovative tool syncs with your calendar to identify optimal times for mindfulness breaks, making mindfulness an integrated part of your day without disrupting your schedule. Your journey to a more balanced life starts here. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to visit pausepoint.io to begin your mindfulness journey today. We look forward to having you with us next time.